Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. Today, delighted to be joined by Phil Thorne, who's part of the founding team at Quorso. Hi, Phil. How are you?
I am good. Thank you very much, Simon. How about yourself?
Brilliant. Yeah, it's as we're recording, we're in heatwave number 2. So it is very, very warm, very, very nice. Although, as part of the traditional British way of moaning about the weather, we could do with some rain because my garden is absolutely brown. So we're never happy, are we, about the weather?
Never happy, as is the majority of the UK, is a yellow brown at the moment when you look around it, rather than the luscious green that it normally is.
So if you listen to this soon after recording, I'm sure you'll appreciate it. If you're listening to it in the middle of winter, then we did have some hot weather at some point. Anyway, on to business. Phil, as I said, you're part of the founding team at Quorso. Before we find out about Quorso and what you guys are doing and how you're helping all sorts of companies all over the world, just tell us a bit about yourself, a bit of a career biog. Where did you start your career? How did you get to what you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. So I think like about 2/3 of the population now. I started my career stacking shelves, being in a retailer itself, but that's not where I went immediately. I started off actually being really interested in the whole area of management. So actually did a lot around the academic side of that, and then went on to help businesses more in an advisory capacity to have a look at their businesses and see whether or not where they could add value to them. But really, I suppose the most relevant thing, kind of as you mentioned, is about 6 years ago, I joined the founding team of Quorso, and we joined it because there was a realization that I'd had over the previous 10 years, along with the other founders, that there was a big group within society who are absolutely essential, of probably one of the most valuable cogs within society there is, which is managers, and that they were overworked, overloaded, and pretty underappreciated. So we set out to make a stop to that. So I joined when we were just 3 people in a cupboard, one of those stories. And now today we, as you mentioned, we work with some of the largest retailers in the world, like the largest store network in the US, which is Dollar General. People like PetSmart, Tractor Supply Company are all using our platform today to help manage their businesses.
Amazing. One of those, I love those stories. Like you say, started in a broom cupboard and scales up. It's you must be really proud of where you started to where you've got to.
Yeah, I'm proud of everyone who's helped us get that on the way. I mean, business is not an individual sport. As we well know, it is a team sport, as any retailer will know as well. And as with everything, it's been the ups and downs. I think one of the things that's been not just the pride, but also it's been really fantastic to be in a founding team and grow and be involved in so many different areas of the business. The only thing I think, and despite being a technology company, I do not code. So I can't give anyone advice on how to write the best software on those side of things. But on the commercial side of things, if anyone who listens to this is interested in starting your business, thinking about all different functions and facets of it, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with them.
Excellent. And we'll get on to contact deals later, but website, your LinkedIn profile, as ever, we'll add in the show notes. So tell us a bit about the business then. So we've at a high level, we know you help retailers, we know we've scaled up, but you talked about managers there and then being one of the most important cogs, whether that be store managers, I assume, or regional, area, divisional, whatever you would kind of call it, those field management teams. So what exactly do you help organizations solve at Quorso?
Yeah, and thanks. So if you think about the role of a district or area manager, or even a store manager, the nature of what they have had to do, particularly in the last 2 years, but over the last 20, 30 years, has increased hugely in terms of the complexity. You don't just have the transactions happening within the 4 walls. You have a number of other things that have come in from the omni-channel side or the fulfillment side of things. I think what we realized when we started Quorso is the burden, both analytically, administratively, but also on the stores themselves, has massively increased. But the nature of the way that people run those stores or send information to those stores has been pretty consistent over time, which is people will give another system or give another report, so that the average manager is getting 30 to 40 different reports every single week, not really knowing what to focus on, not really knowing what to do. And so the idea behind Quorso was to take all that information and tasks, which are across multiple different systems, multiple different areas at the moment. And one of the reasons why 60 to 80% of a week's time of a store or district manager is spent on the administrative side of things, and remove the noise and focus it down to the personalized and prioritized actions for that manager that week, whether it's something like a task that they need to perform very simply on training a staff member or something like that, or it's something that is having a direct impact on the business, which is, for instance, they're opening late or they're closing early, and that's something that they need to fix. Or the nature of what we do with looking at the data analytics is look at where are the underperforming items within their business and really specifically targeting at those people. So rather than saying your sales are down, saying your sales are down in cookies on Thursday afternoons, and this might be the reason behind it. So getting very, very prescriptive on the analytics and the information that we're providing there. And then the whole idea around that is to provide them a really engaging workflow where they can take the right action. Quorso will track and measure whether or not it's actually been impactful or not. And then we've got a whole load of other features and functionality that help them plan their week or help them celebrate the success of their team or really know where they need to focus and prioritize their efforts to make the most of their business. So, I mean, I suppose in summary, it's an analytics tool on one hand, but it's really a tool that is helping the workflow of the manager every week so they can focus on the really important things and get rid of doing the really time-sapping things around the administration and the analytics side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And from some of our studies, I know we kind of talk offline every now and again that we do with leadership roles, our role studies, we see and quantify lots of that admin time or KPI reporting time or gathering data for a regional manager, area manager that may be better and more accurately available in the centre. So all those localisms, and I kind of, as you were talking there, was thinking about my time as a store manager many years ago now, unfortunately, when we used to get a blue bag, and every Friday we get a blue bag. This is, email was around, but pre-WhatsApp and all that kind of stuff. In the blue bag would be all the things from head office, could be 60, 70 documents, all of varying sizes, all with various requests in action. And the good managers, guess what? Prioritised it, got it right, but there wasn't many of them. Most people, something fell through the net, or there was that many checks and balances in place. It just became an admin overhead. So it's looking back, it's really interesting to see how things have progressed, but there's still that plethora of data that exists in all these organisations that it's difficult to see the wood from the trees unless you've got something like this to help you.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's interesting, if you even think about the blue bag and you think about what's available today, all that information is relevant, but it's not always relevant to an individual at a certain time. In fact, when we look at our data on this, we find that the things that we surface to an individual manager will only be surfaced to about 3% of managers. So the 97% of the information that is being sent to them, actually from an actionability viewpoint, is irrelevant. And one of the things that we're very focused on, not just in terms of our tool, but in terms of the whole concept of how we talk to retail, is getting rid of the noise and focusing people on the things which are relevant to them at the right time in the right place is so important to the nature of where we're all going with our lives, whether it's on the customer side of things, whether it's on the social side of things. It's something that we should be thinking about on the employee side of things as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of brings us on to the next crux of the conversation, I think, which is around this personalisation of information. So we know as we speak, and probably unfortunately for the next 18 months, 2 years, rising costs, national living wage is going to go up. They're probably going to drop the threshold down to 21s, which means another group of people will jump into that, which I think is great, but clearly a cost for the employers. Energy's at an all-time high. War always brings instability across the world. So by personalising that data, are you seeing that you're starting to free up those leaders' time to make better use of their time? Because clearly most managers and field managers are more at the higher end of the pay scale than colleagues in supervisory roles. So we need to make sure that we're getting the best value out of them.
Yeah, I think it's that, but I think it's three things in particular. So I think the first thing is absolutely deploying resource in the most efficient and productive way has to be one of the priorities with any organization at the moment, because particularly when you've got labor challenges, when you've got labor cost challenges, making sure that the time is spent the most efficient way is going to give value to your organization, either from the ability to actually see gain somewhere else or the ability not to need to hire in other areas and put the cost up in those areas. But the couple of other things I think we see is actually, firstly, the focus element of things. which is when you personalize something to someone and you give them the right information at the right time, things get fixed quicker. So rather than having a piece of inventory that wasn't out on shelves for 2 weeks before they caught it up, or not doing the stock take properly for 4 weeks until they took it up, or not seeing that there was an issue with, take an example at the moment, someone putting their gas up or their air conditioning up in an area beyond what you were expecting and not getting hold of that quickly, getting hold of those things that week or the day after that they're happening and getting them fixed can lead to a 20% improvement versus where you were going to be over the previous 2 weeks when you're looking at the control group, which is just dollars that come back into, or pounds that come back into the bank account. And then the final thing I think is a super important thing that we all should be thinking about at the moment is actually the time to onboard or the time to engage someone, which is how much value are you losing from not getting new managers or new employees up to speed quickly enough, which again, it's just value leakage if you're not giving them the right tools and training and the right information where they can easily get themselves engaged, rather than complex reports, complex systems, which takes longer and is more cumbersome to get them up to speed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in a market where there's more jobs than people, clearly, if those first impressions right through from initial interview to the onboarding and the first week's month in the business, if people know that there's other opportunities out there, then they're not obliged to stay. And clearly they never have been. But the fact that there's just more jobs means it will be easy for people in the infancy of any employment to quickly move out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's two ways of directing that, isn't there? Which is, the first one is realizing that and realizing you need to put in place mechanisms to get that onboarding better, because if you're taking 6 to 9 months to train someone and their average length of being at your organization is 18 months, then you're only getting 9 good months of employment. The other realization is actually to focus on retention and engagement, which again, when we see from our side, retained and engaged employees, it's common out there, but they're more productive, they're more efficient, and they're more engaging and collaborative with the rest of the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of every organization I think I've worked in, that whole recruitment process, and I know there's lots of automation in there now in terms of the kind of psychometric tests that potentially people at that level would take and all the other bits. There's still a big human element in gathering those, sifting those, arranging interviews, screening interviews, then interviews with potentially future line managers. There's never really in a business a quantification of the cost. And I've seen some good examples in some where they've actually tried to put a cost on the whole end-to-end recruitment process of a colleague, plus the uniform, plus the, maybe ordering a car and all that kind of stuff. And when you see that, it becomes frightening. If, as you say, if people leave within 2 years, it's negative equity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, that's just on the employee side of things. If you think about the manager side of things, where people have invested less in training, have invested less in resources, which is one of the things that we're seeing at the moment. What impact is not giving the right resources to them? What impact is not giving the right training to them having on the organization as well?
Yeah, it was interesting. Just this week, actually, on training, we were having a workshop with a retailer in the UK talking about labour budgeting and just kind of getting a workshop around how we're going to configure the labour budget for them. And we got onto training, and it was kind of, so how much training do you want to budget for? Conversation was, well, it's going to be costly, but the point was, but you're supposed to be doing it anyway. If you're not budgeting for it, then you kind of can't be surprised if it doesn't happen, because it will be, along with service, one of the first things that go. So people will sacrifice their training because they're busy, maybe do it at home if it's an online portal, which isn't ideal, and gets you into all those dropping below national living wage potential averages if it's classed as work. But also people will queue longer on the till because you'll have less people on the floor. So it was a really interesting dynamic of, but it's a cost. But the challenge was, but if you don't budget for that cost, it's probably never going to happen.
Yeah, and I think the thing to add to that, and one of the conversations we're having a lot more with people, is it's not just about the cost, it's about the time.
Yeah.
Which is, there are a finite amount of hours that any store has. That finite amount of hours is also under pressure, not just because of the resource you can put in store, but also because job markets are so tough that many stores are running below the labour hours that they should be at the moment. But when you're thinking about any cost. I mean, there's no more time that you can put into the week or put into the organization, or very little more time that you can put into it. Anything that you add to the organization needs to be thinking about, what does it substitute, what does it take out from the time point of view for your managers, for your staff, rather than just adding another thing on.
Yeah, absolutely. And my analogy is always, the funnel is always full or overflowing. So it's easy just to expect people to be able to absorb more. And unfortunately, certainly in a retail environment, once it hits a store level, there's nowhere else for that to go. And you tend to find either managers just work longer hours because they're salaried. Overtime clearly goes up, which is a cost. But as operators, we learn how to deal with it because we know there's nowhere else for it to go. Now, that's not right, but is kind of unfortunately a fact of working at the bottom of the chain where things get passed down to. So, interesting, really interesting. And that personalisation bit I love, in terms of give me the right information that's for me that I need to act on. Let me know if I've done it. Let me know if I've not done it, and probably let my boss know that I've done it so they can celebrate a good job, and also let them know if I haven't, just to give me a little nudge along to say, come on, we told you about this, it's really important, rather than give me everything and let me decide what's important, because I'll probably make a different decision than you, and we'll both make different decisions than maybe some of our colleagues.
Yeah, and I hope for most retailers it should be fairly self-explanatory, because everyone, or almost everyone, is thinking about personalization on the customer side of things. And I know from a retail perspective, we're customer obsessed, but what you're doing on the customer experience has to be fulfilled by someone. It's going to be fulfilled from the store employee side of things. So what you're doing on that side of the business, just considering, actually, we're a human business, and a human business on the customer side, but a human business in terms of our teams as well. How are we giving the same benefits that we know that the customer wants to the other humans, and valuable humans in our organization, which are our employees?
Yeah, absolutely. And talking of kind of differences, customers, colleagues, let's just have a quick chat about kind of innovation. So I know you're doing lots of work in the States. You talked about Dollar General there in the start, and I know you do lots of work in the UK. How's that market looking from kind of an innovation point of view? What are you seeing across the continent?
Yeah, well, something you can tell from my accent, and if you heard the other founding team, you'd hear from their accents that they're proud Brits. Yep. But started Quorso from this side of the Atlantic, but around 95% of our sales now, and the customers we work with, are in the US. I think what's really interesting about the US market is, I mean, obviously it's a huge market in terms of the store footprint and counts there, and you've got the top 200 stores in the US. I think only 5 retailers in the UK, for instance, would actually make themselves into it because of their just vast footprint across the nation. But the thing that's really interesting to us as we work with people in the UK and we work with people in the US is just the advancements that US companies have made in the last 10 years, which are only just starting to make the radar of UK companies. So how they're managing their data, how they're thinking about the nature of customer experiences, and pulling that back into the infrastructure of the organization on the supply chain side of things. It's a really interesting one. I love your views on it as well, which is the sad reflection for us is that many retailers in the UK have sort of stopped innovating for the last 10 years. Ever since the financial crisis, really, in the same way as US retailers have really put their foot down and accelerated on that. And whether that's something about the culture, whether that's something about the nature of technology markets in the UK, the US, or whether that's something else, we're slightly uncertain. But I'd love your views on it as well, as someone who sits here on the productivity side of the UK as well, and what you think.
Yeah, and we do a bit of work, probably less than you in America, and clearly a lot more in Europe. I think the UK has been great at creating, certainly in the retail world, 3-5 year plans. I think the instability probably in lots of those organisations in senior leadership roles means that lots of those 3 to 5 year plans never get delivered. So it's almost constantly, the plan's constantly evolving, which I'm an advocate of, but actually it's then about, so what actually did you ever deliver from any of those? Somebody comes in with a new idea, new plan, never quite complete the last plan. So that, I think, is a real challenge for them. I think there's been heavy investment in, the online channels. So lots on web, lots on how you deliver, whether that's direct from store or store fulfillment, or certainly warehousing has taken a big step forward. But I think we're just now on the cusp of seeing lots and lots of retailers being forced to upgrade or change their payroll systems for the good and bad. There was lots of press in the news this week, unfortunately, about Next and some of the issues they'd had with their payroll systems because they signed historic 15, 10, 20-year deals with organizations that are now coming to the end. So that will drive some innovation in platforms, tech, cloud-based solutions, which should then hopefully free up some of the productivity angles. And I also think there's in some organizations a real dilemma of do we buy or do we build, and they're still wrestling with that. And I have quite strong views that for me, you use experts for tricky stuff because that's why they exist. Others want to do it all in-house, but then clearly you've got a big maintenance model and ongoing support model. So if I was running an organization, I'd want not necessarily best of breed, but experts in all the various points because you get the benefit of everybody they work with. So I think it's tricky. And scale. I think scale gives you a massive economy, clearly, as you talked about from the US.
Clearly, but I think one of the things that's been interesting about how, for instance, the technology market has moved on is you mentioned those 10 to 15 year deals, and absolutely 10 to 15 years ago, people were writing long deals with software like they were on CapEx. And perhaps that's the reason I did have a conversation with a retailer I will not name, but a large retailer in the UK just 2 weeks ago, and they mentioned they hadn't upgraded their software systems for 10 years, which is something just unheard of on the other side of the Atlantic. But I think it's maybe that contract length and how that contract length is moving. One of the things that's interesting about technology now is this movement from on-prem to cloud and to software as a service, which is the contract lengths are far shorter than 10 years. The degree of innovation of putting yourself in the cloud, and if you put your infrastructure right in the cloud, the ability to bolt on and try things pretty cheaply, without much impact on the organization from doing it, and then like these technology companies do, innovate, trial, scale, is so much higher today, partly through the nature of what's happened in the last 10 years, than it was at the period when those large capex investments were making. And maybe the difference between that innovation curve is really that started to happen since the advent of the mobile phone, since the advent of product-first companies that have really driven themselves in a technology way within the US. That advent of things is only starting to be seen on this side of the Atlantic as well, which is, for us, if you get your infrastructure right, if you get your technology right in terms of having a database where you can have sales data and all other data, put it in a Snowflake, put it in a 1010, it's pretty easy to bolt on a solution like ours, say 2 to 3 weeks to bolt that on, rather than being open heart surgery for the whole of your organization, which I think is the reflection many have about technology today.
Yeah, and I think we've also seen quite a few organizations where it becomes a burning platform. So the need and the speed to move off that platform becomes all consuming. And that's clearly when it's a challenge for that organization. There's challenges in testing, in parallel running, certainly if it's payroll, which doesn't lead to maybe a great experience for the colleagues. And ultimately, once you start impacting them, whether that's pay, benefits, engagement, whatever it might be, then you kind of got a bit of a battle on your hands.
Which is why it's so core whenever you're working with any technology provider, and we'd say the same thing to anyone who comes to us. What speaking to some referral clients, but also kind of what is the onboarding time? What are the impact that you've had on various SLAs? What is the engagement with people, not just at the start, but 6 to 12 months later, are all core things that people should be asking about technology providers rather than just what are your features and functionality.
Absolutely. And on that note, if people want to find out more about you, Quorso, features and functionality, where's the best place for them to get hold of you?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn a lot. What we try and do here at Quorso is we don't just talk about our technology. We like to talk about the market. We'd like to talk about management. We like to talk about ops. And we publish quite regularly on LinkedIn, most prominent platform that we're on. So if you look up Phil Thorne, that's where I am on LinkedIn. And then just going to our website, so quorso.com. We're always happy to speak to anyone, whether or not you want to see the nature of what we're doing or whether you just want to hear about what others are doing in your space. We're more than happy to have the conversation about that.
Brilliant. And as ever, we'll put the link to your profile and the link to the website in the show notes, so we just make it a bit easier for people to reach out. Final question from me then, Phil, is what's the best bit of business advice you've ever been given?
Oh, the best bit of business advice I've ever been given, I think, is put yourself in another person's shoes. I think it's a really important one for management at some point. I think one of the things I've been reflecting on working with managers for a long time is that they get a pretty bad rap from society, which is, I'm sure you've heard the quote, people don't leave bad businesses, they leave a bad manager. Mm-hmm. But actually, more and more people should reflect on the bi-directional relationships that we have within business rather than the solo relationships within business. And whenever you're frustrated with a situation that might be occurring, or whether you are trying to understand what someone might have done, having that reflection of putting yourself in their shoes and understanding what their sentiments are and why they're doing things a certain way for them and what your relationship with them can be because of that is one of the most important things you can do.
Amazing. Great advice. Great advice. Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure to catch up. Always enjoy our chats, and we'll speak again soon.
Simon, thank you very much, and it's great to be on this.